the second part was like what happened during COVID and how it related to COVID, right? Like how did I cope and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that whole 2020 time, that COVID time, the George Floyd time, all of these things that were going on, Black Lives Matter movement, the riots, all of that, and pertaining to the mental health of you, particularly as an African American, and how you handled that as an African American Christian male.
Okay, yeah, there was actually, you know what? I handle different waves, right? There's when George Floyd happened, I was like everyone probably who saw it is pretty evident that the cop was probably wrong. I was infuriated. I was upset. I was mad. And then also I wasn't hopeful that things would happen. And I was like, we've seen this before with cameras or non-cameras, or the stories been told in different decades of individuals. You know, before him, every year is always a staple slogan because of an African-American male being traumatized and killed or so unjustly from my point of view.
This is one of the things I love about Adrian. I mean, this is the honesty, the conversations that need to be had. At this point, people have to talk about what they have thought or their perspective on an issue without being yelled at and told that they're wrong. This is incredibly important.
So at that point, I think the first thing I did, I don't know if I told you, Derrick, the first thing I did was reach out to I have a very close white friend, very, very strong Trump supporter, very, very strong pro-police. We disagree on a lot. I always value his opinion. And I talked to him. I was like, hey, so tell me, what did you see here? What did you think here? Me and him did not have an agreement upon that. And we didn't often until it took him maybe 4 or 5 weeks of seeing different videos and staying away from certain broadcast stations that kind of come back, and we talked about it. So and he came to understanding that he thought the cop was wrong, but there was an initial reaction. But overall, I think that was actually the first time I wrote an opinion piece to the newspaper about George Floyd and how I felt as an African-American male and how I feel like it's a systemic problem. And I sent it out to, I'm in Austin, the Austin Statesman and DFW, and I didn't get any responses back. So I was like, okay, I could be defeated. But I started writing more about different topics on the weekend, man. It kind of, like you mentioned, I have a blog that I wrote about, and I try to find different social dynamic conversations to have or just to bring to light. And that started all because of George Floyd. And that came into now, if you ever find the website, is different topics about suicide or abortion or family dynamics or African-American males and slavery or Donald Trump and what do you have to lose comments or stuff like that, or education and white against whites and blacks. And I just want to keep that conversation going. And that came from George Floyd. So I really, I think guys always take a negative and, always you say turn to a positive or something to have you have a different perspective mindset. So that's how I handled it. I still reach out to individuals who I know historically or customarily think different than I do, just to hear the point of view. I think that nobody should be monolithic in what they get the news from. So I turn to Fox, or I find out what QAnon people are talking about. People they call them crazy. Like they don't think they're crazy. So let's talk to them and find out why they think these type of things. And that's just been more like a good hobby, a good release, something I probably continue to do after.
I think this needs to be said. I cherish my friendship and relationship with Adrian, and I think it's very important to have somebody in your life that you don't necessarily always agree with on certain things, because it makes you think, it makes you more considerate, it makes you more a seeker of the truth. And it's very important that you have people that you can dialogue with, that you can argue with, that you can say, hey, you're right or wrong. Where me and Adrian, a lot of times when we have conversations, we come out to the same place. We want the same thing, but we're trying to figure out how to get there, and we stretch each other. So it's very important, like you said, to grab people and to find people that don't necessarily agree with you on the things that you think. Let me ask you this. How can we go, though, because all of those things I think are incredibly important. You open up your mind. You didn't shut down. But one of the things that I fear, Adrian, I mean, we've had these conversations before, is that the idea of being compassionate might be something that disenfranchise people. And what I mean by that is that how can we take an incident like George Floyd or any incident that you want to make up and empower people, and instead of saying, okay, you guys are such victims and you're going to be victims, and so we're just going to feel sorry for you and not actually empower you to have a voice. And one of the things I think is really cool about you is you started blogging, you started using your voice, you started thinking, you started asking people questions instead of becoming the victim and saying, poor me or poor us. What can I do to actually make a change in our society to empower people?
Yeah, I think you have to do something, because in essence, I'm not gonna lie to you, Derrick, I was not hopeful that these police officers would be let go. We've seen this every year, right? In some different, insert your name here for Black person almost, it seems like it. And you have to find some way to personally have comfort whatever happened, and then also have your way to express yourself in a nonviolent way, hopefully the best approach. And, if it's a protest, if it's joining these different boards, the city boards, the police accounting boards, voting rights act boards, everything you can do to kind of make yourself and your presence, be beneficial to your community, people who look like you, people who don't, to try to show some harmony besides this, being mad, which is a justifiable feeling. I'm not trying to downplay anybody who is mad or upset, but you have to find some action that you think is tangible that can make an impact the best way you can within your scope of your understanding and your time frame and your availability and your resources. And then that's right there, you could find a way to hopefully improve your small, intimate circle and maybe make an impact on other individuals.
Now, this is one of the points that I try to make often, the idea that we have to know that we can make a difference in our community or our society. And just doing it with one person, right? I mean, maybe we won't get to touch the whole world or speak to everybody in the world, or maybe I won't be able to go to Canada and talk to these people or whatever parts of the country, Ferguson or whatever these places are. But if I can begin to sow in my community and raise up or mentor someone else, it matters. It really, really, really does matter. And I had to ask Adrian this question. We probably come out with different answers on this, but I love that he was honest enough to give me his perspective in an honest and transparent way. So what did you think about people that instead of turning to action and getting on the boards and using their voice, those who turned to violence? I mean, what was your initial response when you saw some of the violence that took place in the riots and some of the protests?
You know what? To be frank, I didn't totally disapprove. People have a different threshold of how much they can handle. Maybe that person has seen other types of trauma that I'm not privileged to, or maybe that person is just, doesn't have another outlet. They don't know other ways to recoup. And sometimes, this has been something since the 60s riots, the 1919 riot. I mean, now it's just people react that way. Now, would I be there joining in and probably throwing a brick or stealing? I mean, whatever it is that violence is, I will not probably be there, no. But for those individuals who felt that was their only way to get people's attention, because obviously, protesting like Colin Kaepernick didn't work for them, so they went to a violence thing. I understand their frustration, and I hope it wouldn't come to my city and tear up my city. But if that's how they feel they have to react, I hope they have to do it again, and the police accountability or the city mayors can listen and see the frustration, because people only resort to violence when they feel like the words aren't being told or being adhered to. So that's the best way they had to do it in reaction. I don't want anybody in jail or anybody hurt, but hopefully they got the point across. That's really how I feel internally.
Well, Martin Luther King said he said that rioting was the voice of the unheard. He kind of talked about the sense of when people don't feel heard. But let me ask you about that. Like when you talk about the violence and all of this, one of the most frustrating things, because I do think police reform needs to happen. I do think that education and all these things need to happen in communities, but it took away from what the people were marching for. And it took away voices, because now the conversation was about the rioting and the looting and all of these things, rather than actually the injustices that should be dealt with. And I just really think, Adrian, like, how do we as African American men, you're highly educated yourself, How do we empower people to use their voice? Because also that's another thing. When you take away people's voice, or when people don't think they have a voice, they burst out in anger. How do we encourage people to say, hey, this is another avenue, another conversation. This is something that we can do that actually will work. And we've seen it work throughout history.
Now, refresh that question again. Like you're asking, how can we give people voices? You're saying?
Yeah, I mean, like, how do I look at a young man that feels disenfranchised and he feels hurt, and that's really how he feels, and he's angry, he's mad, and instead of saying, go break that door down, go into a community that probably is an African American community and harm that community, here's some tools that you can do. Here's some things that you can do to influence change in this particular community and environment. Oh,
yeah. I mean, I know it's easier said than done. I'm not going to try to paint it with a broad brush, but in essence, it's educating individuals of your outlets and your resources and your options in life. Many times people don't know what they are until they have a strong figure, political or community environment, an educator, teacher, family, parent or so. Tell them, hey, you could do this. You could do this instead. ABC. You could write your congressman. You could get on city boards. You could get these jobs that impact individuals. You could do nonprofit work. People often go with their first emotion, right? So something happens in the community, you're mad about it. You want to show your frustration. You go there, you do your protest. It could turn ugly or not, but that's the way they think about the short term. But people don't think about the long term of, okay, after 2 months from now, when the dust settles and the cameraman goes away, like Flint, Michigan, the camera people go away, how are we going to save this water? And they're still having problems like that, you know? It's just looking at the long term, and they have to know the resources, and they have to have the time, and then they need somebody to probably open the door for them, because just wanting to be, on a board or something is easier said than done than going through the process of you going through interviews, and they have to choose you, accept you, and your availability. Then somebody already vouch for you. I mean, there's different little outlets, but they also have to be different levels of it. But overall, I just think that it's just communicating with them like you're upset. First, acknowledge you're upset. I gloss over that. Acknowledge you're upset, and then try to say, hey, how can we handle this a professional way that'll get your short-term and your long-term goals set, and then work with them to go down the avenue, is what I believe.
I think when you talk about mental health as well, you just talk about acknowledging that you're upset, how important that is. Like when I come to Jesus Christ, I have to acknowledge that I'm a sinner, right? I mean, acknowledging is a very important thing to understand. All right, I am a sinner. Okay. But acknowledging that I'm upset is the same deal. Like what I saw on television was bothersome to me, and it was hurtful, and it is hurting my heart to see this. And so acknowledging that is so important, because I think there's so many people that are having stains in their heart, and they don't realize that there's wounds there. They don't realize that there's hurt there, and they can't get healed because they don't even acknowledge that the pain is there.
Yeah. You said it perfectly. I mean, I don't think me and you are. I know myself, I'm not a licensed therapist or anything, but I do know one of the steps is to acknowledge what happened or what event happened. And then you can let you know how to adjust and react and accept, or whatever next step is in your circle of moving on. But yeah, the main thing is to acknowledge it and be able to accept that.
I think also, Adrian, too, in a sense of healing as well, I have to acknowledge that I'm upset. I have to, and I have some other points on this, but one, I have to acknowledge that I'm upset. And for me to have reconciliation with you, you have to also acknowledge that I'm upset. You may not even agree with me, or you may not even understand why I'm upset or whatever the case is. But if you can say, all right, you're upset, I see your frustration, let's talk and have dialogue, and maybe we can bring healing here. And I think when you talk about disenfranchised or marginalized people, they don't feel heard or they don't feel seen, and so they manifest in behavior unseemly at times.
Yeah, you said it right there. One of the problems, I think, and one of the major problems I think what happens in America, and anytime we have one of these horrific events, or anytime you even watch politics, you can turn on the news right now, and anytime an event, and one of the things is one party is saying, or one individual, if it's a city ordinance, is saying, I'm upset about A, B, C, D, fill in the blank. But most of the time, the opposite individuals or party feels defensive. You know, they're like, no, you're reading things wrong, or you're interpreting things wrong. They don't justify the other person's reaction or the emotion. And it's a stalemate, and it brings friction. And then you have confrontation. It builds up to resentment, and then they stop communicating, because it takes one person. And maybe it's because I don't know all the answers. I mean, me sitting in my